Welcome to Dave and Darm Demystify, a fintech futures podcast helping make sense of the world of fintech and digital finance. Please sit back and listen as the two Ds take a subject and discuss it to make it clearer and easier to understand.
Demystify.
So, welcome everybody to today's episode. And today we have Leda joining us. And Leda, we've got nothing really particularly to talk about, have we? So,
no, nothing going on, nothing happening.
You have just got a new book coming out, or it's out now. And we're very excited to talk about it and discover and demystify what's inside it. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. And you are right. The book is just out and we are recording this a mere few hours before the London launch. And so I am giddy and excited and a little nervous today, as you would expect.
Fantastic. So, well, let's just get straight into it.
Let's start with what's the book called and why did you write it?
You know, this is where I should be holding one up.
Yes, you should. Go and find one. It's called Bankers Like Us. Oh, no.
There it is. It wasn't far. Yeah, so you can see we went for the color reversal from the previous one.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
I'm working to a theme now. The third one has to be white now. So it is called Beyond Resilience. And it started germinating as an idea when I was writing Bankers Like Us, because I kept bumping up against the fact that we talk about failure a lot because we fail a lot. Most digital ventures fail, transformations or new ventures. The failure rate is staggering. So we talk about the failure because it happens more often than not, but also because we're frustrated with ourselves, right? Because we keep making the same mistakes. But as I was writing the first book, I kept bumping up against the other 5%. We fail mostly, but not exclusively. So I really wanted to go out there and look at the success stories and find out if there is a pattern beyond needing to be very resilient as a person. I sort of bumped up against this idea of personal individual resilience so much while I was writing the book, because the reality is without it, you're nowhere, but it's not enough. So although I tried very hard to not talk about resilience, I ended up talking about it a lot. And I ended up with it in the title, mostly because all the other titles I was excited about, my publisher was like, no, absolutely not. And so every time I was like, this is it, I've got it. And it doesn't have resilience in it. He was like, still no. And we ended up with a book called Beyond Resilience, because actually, ultimately, that's what it's about. There is a pattern of the things success stories have in common. But the thing you can't escape is that it takes a lot of resilience, resilient teams, resilient people, resilient ideas to make it.
Resilient is such a good word, actually, because you're right. I mean, we've been in the game for 30 years and we've had more failures than successes, I would say.
Haven't we all, though?
Yeah, no. But it's sort of like that, dusting yourself off and getting on is...
Yeah.
And one of the discoveries in the book, because the book is interview-based, so I went out there and, my first book was based on my own experiences a lot. This one is not. One of the things I went out and I wasn't looking for it, but it came out very naturally, is that no one is on their first rodeo. And even things that look like successes from the outside leave the people in them unsatisfied because they know what they had to compromise. They know the things that were harder than expected. They knew the personal cost of getting over the finish line. So one of the interesting things about the work is that everyone recoiled when I used the word success, you including, Dharmesh, when I interviewed you. Like, success feels like such a shiny word. And anyone who's actually been operational in any role, be it corporate, entrepreneurial, or both, they know that success is a dangerous term. But I felt that way about resilience. Like over the years, I've been offered jobs. And, you get to a point where you become suspicious, right? When somebody calls you for a job, you go, why me? And the most consistent answer I've been getting from hiring managers and recruiters in the last few years is because you're resilient. And part of me is like, yeah, thanks. But you've told me everything I need to know about your organization. I don't want it. But it really got me thinking that actually the book could be very short and it could be, you have to do a lot of things, but above all, you have to be resilient. I went for the reverse and said, well, it's taken as read that you have to be resilient. Here's all the other stuff you have to do.
So what are some of the other things that you have to do? What are the things you've seen? Because I mean, like here we are, as I say, we're 30 years into this journey for Dharmesh and me. And actually, when you look back over 30 years, it's been a massive success in many ways.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like the individual chunks have been failures, but somehow you look at digital banking and, you know, you go, well, the world has moved to digital banking. And so somewhere along the line, we must have had successes.
Exactly. It's been linearly a success. Each day has felt like more of a struggle than it needed.
I mean, maybe that's why we're sort of old enough and grey-haired enough to be able to kind of look back and realize that something, you know, and I agree, it has to be beyond resilience. Other things really matter because in the long run, we've achieved a lot.
We have achieved a lot, but we have not been efficient as an industry. We have taken the most painful path available most times. And as you say, what else do you need to do other than be resilient? One of the interesting things that came up in the book is that the basics are actually quite a long list. There are quite a few things that you have to do consistently, simultaneously to succeed. I would suggest that part of where we fail is that we leave quite a few of the basics for later. So, for instance, one of the things that came up again and again and again that wasn't surprising is that most entrepreneurs looked at their failed attempts and confessed that they left either business drivers or pricing drivers for later. They focused on innovation, fundraising, getting a product to market, getting early traction. Didn't work out what should it cost, what can it cost, what can the market pay, or paid the price for it. Similarly, and it's actually different currency, similar flex. When corporate transformations failed, people look back and go, we didn't manage headspace. Actually, the currency you need to manage if you are in a corporate setting is attention, is headspace. We didn't manage, we run out. So these things, complicated as they are, came up again and again and shouldn't have been surprising. Because actually, when we do a post-mortem of the things that have failed, we know that we don't manage resources well. The thing that did come up a lot, and I was more surprised by it than I should have been, but I think I was surprised because it made me personally uncomfortable, is that everyone talked about intentionality and how you use your time and using your time to get the basics right when you feel you can't afford to. Because it's counterintuitive spending time to get the thinking done when you don't have time, you don't have money, it feels uncomfortable. So most of us don't do it. But that was one of the things that came up again and again and again. Sit down and work out what you want to be. Take the time you don't think you have. Your future self will thank you later. And that came up again and again, mostly from people who didn't do it first time around and paid the price.
Do you know what? I have to make a confession. Now, I haven't read all of the book, but as far as I have read, I actually just want to get my physical copy so that I can start making my notes as I would normally do. I like to turn the pages and fold the pages and mark things. So I'm kind of looking forward to that bit. But from the bits that I have read, I like this whole theme of there's this central thing about resilience. But actually, this is like one of the first reads that covers everything to do with running a business from startup. And that's what I kind of like about it, because you get people that just write about product market fit. There's very few people that write about the pricing, right?
Yeah.
And then there's
I know.
that whole people aspect, right? There's encyclopedias on the people aspect side of it, right? But this is like a compendium of the whole lot of how to get a successful startup as such, I guess, you know. I kind of like all the dipping in and out of the different quotes as well and the different writers, because it just gives you a different angle. But that must be quite difficult to synthesize. You know, how do you interviewed so many people and you've read quite a bit and you brought it all together.
Well, let's just say that there was definitely a moment halfway through writing the book after I had finished the interviews, and I was like, this is not working. This is not coming together the way I wanted to. Because for those who haven't read it yet, I did do 65 interviews.
65?
65 interviews.
You barely count to 65.
And none of the interviews are a standalone interview. So they're all woven into each other.
Correct.
I don't know if you've ever come across a book. It's actually quite an old book called Soldier, about the experience of being in the armed forces. That has done exactly that. You don't hear the author's voice in anything other than you tell a very compelling story in the way you choose to sequence the quotes. I read that book a good 20 years ago. It stayed with me so much. That's what I wanted to recreate. I have not done anywhere near as good a job as in that book. But that was the idea, that there is nothing as compelling as bringing the stories of all of these people on the topic rather than expecting the reader to do that synthesis. The other thing that I wanted to recreate was that I had a set of questions that I asked everyone, as you know, Darm, but then the conversation took a life of its own with everyone. Some of the people I spoke to chose to share very personal stories, some didn't. I would never ask for the personal stories. They were more forthcoming than I would have anticipated at the beginning because they were part of what made the person. Some people delved really deeply into certain parts of their business, either because it was top of mind for them in the moment when we spoke, or because it was the hardest lesson for them. So once I went through my questions, the conversation took a life of its own, and I wanted that organic dynamic to be present in the reading. Actually, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Now we will know whether it worked, whether people who pick up the book can actually pleasantly follow the flow, even if they don't know the people involved. Because I think in our industry, there's also an element of picking up the book and go, oh, look, I know Darm. Darm is in the book. What did he say about this?
Yeah. I mean, I have to say that, just like your articles, you kind of go on this tangent and you think, where the hell is this leading? And then it all comes back together. And that has just happened like through a few of these chapters. And I'm like, it's like one of those movies, like, where is this going? Oh, no, I get it now. I do love that,
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I did. Somebody told me recently that my writing isn't the dip in and out. Like they said, oh, normally I read business books, like skimming the first sentence of every paragraph. I can't do it with yours. And I was like, I'll take
you
that.
You can't even skim the content page and know what this book is really all about.
Yeah, cryptic titles. I do that. But you know what? I shouldn't admit this now, but because my titles tend to be idiosyncratic, as people who read me know, often years later, people go, you wrote about this. Can you find that article? And it's like, yeah, I'll do a keyword search and hope for the best. And then you find it and it's called Odd Socks or something. And you're like, yep, I can see where my brain is going there. It's just not obvious.
So I wanted to go back to the comment you made around intentionality and sort of taking time. It's a really interesting thought, because I guess when I think about my career in terms of how I've approached things, I know I've just gone for it. Get up in the morning and just go for it. I've got some assumptions. I've got some people around me. And I do remember listening to a talk by Mervyn King, who was the governor of the Bank of England. And he always talked about, and I found this really surprising, but he would never work in the mornings. He would spend time thinking in the mornings.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow.
That's wow. The discipline.
Yeah, and I do think it's a really, really important aspect of work we do and how we do it, because the danger is if you don't sort of spend time rationalizing and thinking, then you just JFDI everything.
100%. But let me make this deeply uncomfortable for you with the 3 examples that made it uncomfortable for me in the book, right? Because you're right. If you abstract it like that and go, if I don't spend time thinking, who will do that thinking for me? Who's going to be intentional? But let me give you the 3 examples in the book that made me the most comfortable. The first one was from Daniela Binatti from Pismo, who is saying that when she and her 3 co-founders, one of whom is her husband, so just think about the financial impact this has on the household level, right? When they founded Pismo, they took a year to whiteboard what kind of company they wanted to be. And that's a year when you have to feed your children and buy groceries and so the discipline, and these are not people who are made of money, like, okay, they've had a good exit now, but they didn't at the time. The discipline it takes to say, we've had a career, we've learned things. What have we learned actually? And what do we want to be? Scary. Second bit that is scary. Udaya Karaju of Bond AI doesn't expect any of his hires to be effective and productive for the first 6 months. And because he wants people to be aligned to the purpose of Bond AI, he takes a very long time to hire. So from saying we need a person to that person being operationally effective, it can be a year and a half. I've been hiring for 20 years. Intellectually, I get that. Practically, I would never permit myself that. Let alone my teams, right? Third thing that is deeply uncomfortable, but also very right. The two co-founders of Infuse sat down and worked out what they would do from a point of first principles in every eventuality before they had any business, any money, any customers. So what will we do if one of us gets sick? What will we do if we stop wanting to work together? What will we do if one of us has a family problem or gets divorced? How will we negotiate? Now that we have nothing to lose, what do we think the right answer is? And they were saying that they took the time because one of them had had a really bad experience with a co-founder at the beginning, and went to a lawyer and was like, look, we need this codified as our shareholder agreement. We don't have any money or any shares yet. So hold on to this. We'll be back. But all of those stories intellectually, I know they're right. Materially, they made me deeply uncomfortable because I know what it's like to be in the coalface. And the thing you don't feel you have is time.
I think that's so true.
I mean, going back to your point, Dave, though, right? I remember, I think there is I don't know whether you feel it, but I certainly would. If I sat in a room just thinking and people came in. So I sat in a room in my first office in NatWest when I was head of strategy and architecture. I sat in a room I claimed as my office, and the head of delivery said, oh, do you mind if I just use a table in here? I said, yeah, it's fine. And I literally sat and thought for about 3 hours. And at the end of 3 hours, I wrote presentation, process, data, right? And she said,
that it?
Is that it? Is that what you've done in 3 hours? And I'm like, well, I think this is the architectural model that I want to take the entire bank into. She goes, we've got tandem computers, we've got mainframes, we've got client server, blah, blah, blah. How do you expect to simplify it into that? That's just nonsense. And she goes, that's taken you 3 hours to get to that point. And I'm like, yeah, actually, it's a lot more complex than you think, right?
Exactly. You know that thing, the Mark
Twain. It's that de bono. Yeah.
I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one.
Yeah, look,
people look at you and say, you spent all that time doing what? I mean, it's like, yeah, thinking.
Yeah.
You can't quantify the output.
Our culture, our working culture doesn't value people thinking.
No, that's right.
You're right, because you feel under pressure the whole time to be doing output. I'd give you another example, Dharmesh, is when we were at Intranet, you came up with business marketing technology. And I was like, bloody hell, that's a bit simple, isn't it? And here I am 30 years later, and that describes the whole way we all work, isn't it? I would say good things come to those that wait, in terms of if you can afford the time. And I love your examples, by the way, because I think not rushing in is so kind of vital.
But I think the caveat is exactly what you just said. You think you can't afford the time very often. So I can say that I would not have the discipline to do any of the three things I just shared with you as examples of the right thing to do. And all three are businesses that are thriving. They were not penalized for doing what they did. But I know that if I were in their shoes, I would not feel I have the time. As you say, do you have the time? Can you take the time? It's a choice. And it's a choice we often don't take. And although if I look back both at my career and at all my blogs and my first book, I castigate the cult of busyness. I talk very much about how nobody can think well in 20-minute intervals. Nobody can think well if you're context switching without it being your own choice. And I also talked a lot about how we infantilize our decision makers, right? Because we feed them pre-digested information. But the alternative is uncomfortable because I've been raised in this culture. And I must admit, it surprised me how uncomfortable it made me. As I was typing these sections of the book, I was like, I know this is right. I also know I wouldn't have the discipline to do it.
But it is... Yeah, sorry, Dharmesh. I mean, I was just going to say, but I think it's... I mean, I go back to the title of your book, which is Beyond Resilience, because actually what do we learn is we learn you read sort of LinkedIn or business books, it's all about learning from failure and picking
Yeah.
yourself up. And it's all, and you just go, well, actually, that probably can only go so far. Well, I mean, it's taken me to where I've got to be honest with you. I'm very good at dusting myself off, but you just think that I love it because it's that there has to be other ways of doing this. And I then think about my children and school. We're not taught to spend time and relax and think and meditate on problems at school. So immediately you can sort of think about, well, taking my children and say, well, actually, if you've got a problem,
spend time thinking about it.
Spend time with it,
I had a boss early on in my career who said that we teach people in a corporate life to live with the problem, but not stay with it. And at first I was like, I don't know what you mean, but I totally know what he means, because we are so good at workarounds, particularly in our industry, because we accept that we will never give problems the time they need to be resolved. So actually, since we're going to have to live with the problem, we work around it. But if we stayed with the problem, we might solve it. And one of the things that came up again and again is that you have to accept that this work will take time, and time is the only resource you will never have more of. And how you use it matters, but urgency isn't the only answer. Yeah. There is that weird balance between not putting things off. Like one of the things that came up again and again is people on their second rodeo saying, well, look, I didn't pay enough attention to pricing, or I didn't pay enough attention to commercialization first time around. But the balance between not putting things off and actually taking time intentionally early on is important. The other thing about timing, on the flip side, for the corporate citizens amongst us, is actually realizing when the clock starts ticking. And again, that's something that came up again and again. And when people said it, I had that aha moment of, yeah, actually I've been there, which is when you're trying to do a big transformation project inside a bank, the most energy and time and creativity will be spent persuading the powers that be that you should be allowed to do it. What we mostly didn't realize, or at least I mostly didn't realize for the first 15 years of my career, is that for the organization, the clock starts ticking when you have the first conversation, not when you get the green light, which is why the vast majority of transformation programs run out of steam halfway through, because as far as the organization is concerned, they're not halfway through. The clock didn't start when they said, okay, then do it. The clock started in all the time you were bothering them with this thing. We don't manage our resources in that way because we didn't realize that. I'll give us the benefit of the doubt. We didn't realize it for a long time that this is when the clock started. So again, how you spend time and how intentional you are and how mindful you are and what you choose to give it to becomes the single most important leadership decision. And it's done without any guarantees that you're doing the right thing. It's scary. It's really scary.
Go on. I wanted to check with you as well, because the book kind of says, digital transformation and for fintech is kind of financially orientated as such. But actually, when I read it, I know a lot of the people come from that industry, but it could equally apply to non-financial services companies, especially technology companies.
You are my publisher's agent, aren't you? So my publisher is of the exact same opinion. And actually, he was very disappointed that I did not make it wider. Do I agree with you and him that it applies to absolutely everyone? I do, actually, because it's the human problems, structural problems. None of it is about finance. The reason I stuck with what I know is twofold. The first one is that the naysayers always pretend they're unique. And when it comes to finance, I have the depth to prove to them that they're not, or that their exceptionalism doesn't apply the way they think it does. If I try to apply this to pharmaceuticals and they said, well, you don't understand our industry, I couldn't defend the position of it doesn't matter. And because I know that 90% of the conversations we have come from a place of resistance, the reason is I can fight that resistance. I was looking for a softer word, but I can't find it. So I think that someone who's open to finding the lessons could find them irrespective. But for those who are willing to resist, it feels I'm in a more defensible position. The second reason is that a lot of people buy their own hype and drink their own Kool-Aid. And sticking to the industry I know allowed me to navigate who I wanted to speak to, which sounds a bit awful. But the reality is our industry is full of certain narratives that I just don't think are very helpful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of language around a particular type of leader that just isn't the only way. I'm not going to say that it doesn't work, because of course it does for some people, but it isn't the only way. And so knowing the industry allowed me to navigate and be more intentional.
But I think it's also that our industry needs this. I mean, so we're running out of time, but I think about where we are now, like, you know, in many ways over kind of digital transformation part 1, shall we call it?
Yeah.
We could have had time and we didn't take it.
Right.
Now there's a real part 2. Let's call it digital transformation part 2. We're about to enter an era in which, before you think of something, you're already kind of tapping at generative AI to give you the answer. So that whole thing of taking time, the speed of everything, it's kind of like happening so fast that we are going to be under more pressure, not less pressure, to just do stuff. And, now's a very timely moment to say, look, just because you can do it, don't, without really. And in fact, it's even more important to really stop and think this stuff through, because, resilience, frankly, then just becomes, almost throwaway, because we can do stuff and fail and do stuff so much faster. It's almost like a commodity. And
we're not there yet.
But I just wondered what you thought of that it just sort of feels like we need that time more than ever, don't we?
We do. We absolutely do. And I agree with you. In fact, I do talk about the fact that when I started my career, I firmly believed that knowledge was the gap, the delta that we needed to close. When we understand what is possible, we will get on this transformation train, because there is no choice. But also, this is better. Like, why would you not do what's better for your business, for you, for your society? I now know that it's a narrative of human weakness, habit, fear, and it's not about knowledge. And in fact, one of the things that some people have commented already on is that this is a book about technology transformation, and it doesn't talk about technology at all. It doesn't talk about any specific technological capabilities, because I fundamentally believe that is not the problem. Well, two things: that the technology component is not the problem, and that actually the technology itself is never the answer, because you're going to need to evergreen whatever you're doing, because today's thing is not tomorrow's thing. So, but even then, even with that rapid change, the technology itself has never been the issue. And to your point, Dave, do we need it more than ever? We do. Have we learned how to do this? We have not. Should it be a commodity, like you describe? It should. But it's not. In fact, because of all the things we haven't done over the years, it's harder than ever. And one of the things that is happening simultaneously is that the legacy uplift that we didn't do inside big organizations, combined with the slightly cavalier, irresponsible attitude we've had towards entrepreneurship as an industry, going, it's fun, it's great, it's for everyone, encouraging people to try it, combined with free money, all of which is not quite there anymore, means that it's harder for entrepreneurs and it's harder for intrapreneurs. It's harder for everyone, with the pace getting faster, the risks getting greater, and the regulators getting impatient. So all of a sudden, the personal sacrifice required is even worse, even higher. And should it be a commodity, like you say? Yes, it should be, but we're not there yet. And one of the things that I refer to again and again in the book is, if you're reading this and thinking, bloody hell, that's not for me, that's fine. In fact, this isn't for most of us. There's quite a lot of the stories of the folks in the book that I even asked them in the interview, why did you go again, you absolute lunatic? Why would you have a career spanning 20, 30 years, a couple of successful exits, and not sit on a beach sipping pina coladas? The answer I got from some people is like, I don't like pina coladas. Like, have something else. But seriously,
I don't like
why?
being on a beach.
Yeah, I would be on the beach. Like, I'm telling you, I wrote this book. I'm fascinated by this work. I'd be on the beach.
Interesting. Anyway, well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. We're very much looking forward to the book launch. And
Congratulations.
Thank you. And we haven't talked about one of my favorite bits in the book, which is Dharmesh's story. But people are going to have to pick up the book and find out now.
Indeed. Yeah, I'm blushing already.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
And I look forward to seeing you later.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Dave and Darm Demystify. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tune in next time as we take another topic and demystify it.